Welcome to another edition of the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast with me, Dotun and and him, the Legendino, who is in Rio. Good morning, Tim.
Very good morning. And we have a very special guest to talk today about a very special subject, don't we, Dotun?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad that we can welcome back Johnny Ludden to the conversation, because every time he's on, we know that we're going to cover the gamut of football knowledge, history, not least with Manchester United.
Because he's what he is, John. He's obsessed with his history. He believes the past was always better. So he's a kind of Luddenite. Yeah. That's what he is.
Oh, I get it. I get it. How long did it take you to work that one out, Tim? Yeah, it took him a while, because the last time you were on...
Just during your introduction, it was ticking around my head.
Well, but I tell you, the game that we're looking at today, and really for all sorts of reasons, as you can imagine, is a game that, watching it again, still put hairs on the back of my neck, because this is one of the first football matches that I remember as a young boy. Wow. It really is. And I'm almost in tears thinking about it. But we're talking about the European Cup final at Wembley, Manchester United versus Benfica, a match that is sometimes described. There's a lot of drama around this, John, as you know, but it's a match that's sometimes described as the Bobby Charlton European Cup.
Yeah, well, obviously it all stems back to Munich, because Bobby was a survivor, and it was like 10 years later, and he scores two of the goals that win the European Cup for Manchester United. It's just like a story that you couldn't make up, because he was literally in the crash. He was thrown out of the plane. It was a miracle he survived. It was a miracle anyone survived. And he was only a kid. People said he was 19 years old in the crash. Lost all his mates, most of his mates. And then he was back. The amazing thing, he was back playing shortly after the crash. He helped United get to Wembley. And he was the 10 years that it took United to actually win the European Cup. He was the guy at the front. He was the one. And it was just everything that happened at Wembley. Was it May 29th of May 1968, obviously, that it was Sir Bobby's goals that won him the cup. Because
it is, you couldn't script this, could you? You really couldn't.
You couldn't make it up, Tim. If you went to this with a Hollywood producer, he'd tell you just do what he just wouldn't.
And it is the high point of a professional career. I mean, in purely sporting terms, it is. And Bobby made that clear himself. He said it was much harder to win this than it was to win the World Cup with England.
Yeah.
So if you just put those in sporting terms, and then you add on Munich and everything that's associated with that, and Bobby himself referred to it this night as a night of triumph and deliverance. And there's lots of emotion swirling around. You know, Bobby had survivor's guilt, didn't he?
Yeah.
You know, having to look.
Apparently, he never spoke about. Sorry, Tim. He never spoke about it.
Well, he wrote this, for those of you watching in Technicolor, I can't recommend this book highly enough. It's Bobby Charlton, My Manchester United Years. And towards the end, he did two. He did My England Years and he did My Manchester United Years. And the England one is good, but the Manchester United one is, it's honestly, it's one of my favourite football books. It's one of my favourite books, actually, because he's just so honest about everything in that quiet, dignified way that you'd expect from him. And he talks about survivor's guilt, you know, because he has to look at the friends and families of his mates who've died, and you know that there's that thing of like, why did I survive and not them?
Yeah.
So there's that. There's a little bit of guilt from Matt Busby, the manager, who they refer to as the old man affectionately. And Charlton says when they win this game, you looked at him and you really could see that he was the old man. Because there's some guilt from Busby as well, because Busby, when United go into the European Cup, as the Champions League was then known, it was against the wishes of the Football League, who'd stopped Chelsea going in the previous year. But this was Busby's dream. And as a result of Busby's dream, the great team died at Munich.
Yeah.
So there's guilt there as well. And Charlton calls this night triumph and deliverance. It just takes on a religious dimension, I think, of a communion with those who lost their lives in pursuit of the same dream that was achieved at Wembley on May the 29th, 1968.
I think communion is a great word, Tim, because it was like a religious, it was just something that they had to win. And it was always a difficult tournament to win when you was in it, but it was at that time you had to win your league to get back in it, to have that chance, to have this communion, as like you say. And it was only 58, I think it was 6 years after Munich, 7 years after they actually got back into the European Cup. And they had a few close runs. And it was just such, I mean, you say about, I mean, Busby was only 49 when the crash happened. It's only 59 when he won the European Cup. But it, like you were saying, it aged him. You can only imagine what Busby was going through about having to, getting back on that plane the third time. I mean, it must, I mean, it did break him. It broke him and Jimmy Murphy's relationship up, because obviously Jimmy Murphy kept United going after the crash. And when Busby come back, they were before the crash, they were close. After the crash, they was never close. There was never close again. It was like Busby was trying to shut out Jimmy because it reminded him of what Manchester United was before, and Jimmy could never understand.
So who was Jimmy? Who's Jimmy Murphy?
He was the assistant.
Jimmy Murphy.
And the only reason that he
Jimmy
wasn't on the
Murphy,
plane is that he was with Wales, qualifying
He was
Wales for
managing
the World Cup. So that's why he wasn't on the plane.
Well, but Jimmy wanted to go because they'd already won 2-0 away in Tel Aviv against Israel. So, but Busby said, "No, it's your duty. You're the Welsh manager. You'll never forgive yourself if anything went wrong." So Jimmy stayed behind, and he was coming back from Wales. He just got back to Manchester an hour before the crash happened in Germany, and he was in a taxi. The Israelis had given him a pile of oranges, so he had this big box of oranges with him, and he was in a taxi going back to Old Trafford, and he always thought there's something not right here. And when he got back to United, his secretary was waiting for him to say the plane had crashed. And they didn't know he was alive or dead. It was only then. I think it was a guy from the Daily Express rang and said, "We've got confirmation of so many names." And Jimmy always said it was just the longest night of his life. He just picked a bottle of whiskey up off the shelf, drank it, didn't even know. He just kept going through the night, and the names were coming in who'd lived, who survived. The families were ringing up. It's just incredible. It's just like you were saying before, Tim, you just couldn't make that kind of nightmarish situation up.
And one thing I think is often forgotten in the narrative, because you look at the scoreline and it's Man United 4, Benfica 1.
It wasn't
it's a stroll. That's easy.
Yeah.
It really was a hard game. And United came so close to losing this game. Yeah, it's a fascinating game because it isn't one-sided at all.
It's not a great game, is it, Tim? It's full of drama.
I do like it as a game. I find it very interesting as a game for a number of reasons. And one is that you're seeing Bobby Charlton as an English Di Stefano, which he was obsessed with Di Stefano. He'd seen Di Stefano in the early years of United in the European Cup. And
he moved like Di Stefano, didn't he?
Yeah, he looked like Di Stefano. I mean,
he probably went bald on purpose, just so he could be more like Di Stefano.
When he first saw Di Stefano playing Burnabout, when he murdered United 3-1 back in '57, he said he's glad he wasn't on the pitch. At the time, he was just a kid. And Busby says, "Just watch their number 9." And he watched him. This is like watching an alien.
It was like dominating everything that happened on the pitch, from one penalty area to the other penalty area. And you can see Charlton doing this in United's side. Yeah. So that fascinates me to watch Charlton absolutely at his peak is fabulous.
2-footed as well, Tim. 2-footed.
Yeah, absolutely. And could dip the shoulder either side, you know.
And not just two-footed. When you see that first goal that Charlton scores, you know, great header. I've got to say that is.
I think that was the wisp of his hair.
Well, George Best says in one of his books, he said that wouldn't have gone in if he wasn't going bald.
Yeah.
I don't think them two ever really. Yeah, I don't think ever really saw eye to eye.
George Best is a really important figure in this because.
Do you know where he emerged as a truly world star?
Benfica.
2 years earlier,
at
Benfica, when they played them in the earlier rounds of the European Cup that year. And United won 3-2 at Old Trafford. And so Benfica think, well, we can overturn this. Yeah. And then just Best runs riot and they won 5-1.
They put the kickoff back an hour as well, because Eusebio was receiving European Player of the Year trophy. So they just melts it to pile the pressure on. And then, like you say, back to you, Tim, George just went mad.
Yeah, and that was the game where Dennis, where Law, Charlton, they agreed that it wasn't just the game of George Best.
Yeah.
It was the moment when the whole team clicked. It was the perfect moment. So, fast forward a couple of years, United, with great difficulty, have got themselves through Real Madrid in the semi-final. It's now Benfica against United in the final, and they done Benfica home and away 2 years earlier. Yeah. So they consider themselves favourites going into the game on a hot, humid evening at Wembley. It's all set up now for a great game between two of the finest sides in Europe at the time.
But crucially, George Best, and I'm glad that you mentioned the game 2 years previously, because by now, of course, Benfica know who to hack down. You know, George Best plays a crucial role here. You know, you were saying earlier, John, that it ain't a great match. Well, it's a man's match, this one, because there's a lot of heavy duty tackling going on.
It gets very feisty.
Yeah,
it gets really feisty.
George Best
they were queuing up to kill him, weren't they?
Yeah, well,
literally,
there's no angels because there's Nobby Styles on the other side, and Styles. Charlton absolutely loved Styles. It's a love affair, and Styles, you can see in this game just how horrible he was if you're playing against him, because he's defensively he's very, very good, but he's always winding you up. He's always, and he's
pinching you on the bum, that kind of thing.
And every time the decision goes against United, he's throwing his arms at the referee. And there's one point where he hacks Eusebio, and then he just flops to the ground, showing to the ref, no, he died. You know, one of my favourite style stories is later on that year that they played the World Club Cup against the Estudiantes of Argentina, and Styles was on a hide into nothing the whole thing. You know, as he arrives in the airport, there's
the
Styles, the bandit,
absolutely.
And he got himself sent off, obviously, and he got himself sent off when he was moaning about yet another decision that's gone against him. And the referee calls him out and said, "What did you say?" And Styles shouts out, "Well, he can't fucking see. Turns out he can't hear either." If you're going to get sent off,
could understand English though, couldn't he? That was the trouble.
If you're going to get sent off, do it for something
funny. He did the
funny.
Same in the semi-final against Real Madrid at the Bernabeu.
He kicked Amancio off the ball, didn't he? He crippled him off the ball.
Well, just before half time, Amancio, they'd been in a battle in the first half, and Madrid were 3-1 up at half time. They were running riot, and it looked like it was all over. And as they were coming up at half time, Styles' knee was ripped open, and he was pouring whiskey on it. He was pouring whiskey on his knee to stop the blood. Anyway, they both come out in the tunnel at half time, and the referee's the famous Italian, I can't remember his name, gets them both up against the wall, and he says, "No more." And the Styles are like, "Yes, ref, no problem." And he goes out. First 2 minutes of the second half, Amancio goes for Styles' knee, and the referee has his back turned. So nobody does nothing. He turns around. I see him flat out on the floor, Amancio. He's flat out on the floor. And he goes over to the crowd of throwing oranges at him, they're throwing shoes. And he goes over to the referee, taps him on the shoulder and says, "I think you best have a look at him, ref. You know, he don't look too good." And that was it. Amancio was out of the game. he was a hitman, wasn't he? He was a Collier hitman. It was a knife in them games then, because everybody had one. Everybody had somebody like Styles.
And he could play a bit as well. I mean, it's often forgotten that third goal, England in the World Cup final 2 years earlier, you know, the controversial one where ball crosses and Hurst comes and a shot comes down off the crossbar. Long past the ball is Nobby Styles. And that's often forgotten, that he could play a bit, as well as just spending the whole game balling out the referee, balling out his teammates. You know, this little bespectacled figure who you could imagine in the church choir off the field, you know, quietly selling insurance
on
or
the
something.
pitch. The United players, the United players couldn't handle him on the pitch. He used to drive him mad because it was just moan. But they loved him. They absolutely loved him, you know, off the pitch. But he was blind as a bat. You know,
could you argue though that
he used to sit next to me mum at school, actually, St. Pat.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They went to the same school?
Yeah, it's my mum, Colliers.
Same class?
Yeah.
Did he kick her at any point?
No, he kicked him. More likely.
Like that. Come on, Tim. It's too much of a gentleman.
A snotty little sod is how she remembers him.
We were all snotty little sods. We were all snotty little sods at that age. So.
Well, you were a snotty bigger sod, bullying the little sods. That's how I imagine
funny
you.
enough, no, actually, I was one of the smallest guys in the class. I don't know where the size came, because I was one of the shortest. I used to get smacked around. I had to fight to defend myself. That aside, I wonder if you could argue that both a combination of the focus of Benfica being George Best, stop him by any means necessary, plus you've got their other distraction, which is somebody like Nobby Styles biting them in the ankles, that allowed Bobby Charlton to roam around a lot freely.
Yeah, although there's something absolutely key to this game, which is remember, there's no substitutes. And right at the start, the Benfica right back does himself, and he can't run. I don't have much sympathy for him because he's called Adolfo. Now, if you're called Adolfo and you're born in the early 40s, that's not a good sign. It does tell you a great deal about which side of the line Portugal
life isn't going to be good, is it?
No. So poor old Adolfo, he spends the game desperately trying. He can't run properly. The right back, and this gives Benfica serious problems because, you know, he's got the full 120, it turns out, to play, and today you just take him straight off. And it is on the fellow who won the Man of the Match award was the young Man City left winger John Aston, who, and as Kenneth Wolstenholme keeps saying in the commentary, the United fans hated him. They just barracked him usually, and he didn't do a great deal after, and he didn't do a great deal before. But this was his day, because all he's got to do is push the ball past poor old Adolfo, and Adolfo's never going to catch him. So, and so Benfica have got to think, well, how can we protect him? So they've got to take a man. Either they leave John Aston to do that, and sometimes that happens, or they put another man over, and that opens up space for Charlton and Best. And this young Brian Kidd playing for the injured Dennis Law on his 19th birthday.
Another St. Pat's lad as well, Tim. Another St. Patrick's, you know, where Nobby came from.
Right. So there's some local lads in his team. I didn't know Brian Kidd was local.
Yeah, Colliers, same as Nobby.
Well, it's an amazing feat on your 19th birthday, because he ends up scoring not the winner, but a crucial
the clincher, goal. Really. It's the moment when you know there's no way back.
Of course, yeah. But we haven't even talked about, I mean, we're talking about extra time now, essentially, but we haven't completed the match.
Yeah, well, just a little bit on the game. It fascinates me the way that Styles is used differently by United and by England. Because for England, he's a central mid, he's a holding midfielder. And there's two centre-backs behind him, which is Jack Charlton and Bobby Moore. So he is then holding, which allows the fullbacks to push forward. United use him totally differently. They use him in the centre of defence alongside Bill Folkes. I never know how you say his surname. How do you say it, John?
Folkes, you did right. You did right.
And who Bill Folkes is the veteran.
Was also a survivor.
Yeah, another survivor.
And apparently, do you know Bill Folkes had he missed? I think he's missed only 2 or 3 matches for United in those 10 years. Am I right there, Johnny? He's only missed 2 or 3 matches.
He was amazing. He was an ever present. He was an ever present. He was one of them who played in the game was it 15 days after the crash.
Yeah.
He was a survivor. And he also scored the goal against Real Madrid in the semi-final that put United through.
Yeah, and Charlton says when everyone
Which is
saw that
another
the ball was falling for folks to shoot, they all thought,
Yeah.
"Oh, fuck me, that's going into Rose Ed." And then he
Well,
buried it like a striker, you know.
There's a great story about that. Paddy Crerand's taking the throw in, and he looks up and he's got the ball and he sees Bill Folkes running. He says, "Where's he going?" Because he never went over the halfway line. So anyway, he takes the throw, he gives it George, gives it Best. Best beats one, beats two, beats three, gets to the byline, and then there's a story that Best looks up and he sees Folkes coming into the box and he says, what's he doing up there? Anyway, he scores the goal that takes United to win.
Yeah. Good on those.
He just walks out of the crash.
The United are using Styles
Amazing,
as a centre back. So Styles picks up Eusebio, and Folkes has a tough night against the giant striker Torres, which means towers in Portuguese. It's a very literal-minded team because the towering centre forward is called Towers, and the African-born master of the midfield, Coluna, he's the backbone of the side, and Coluna means backbone. So it's very literally minded Benfica side. But anyway, so you got Styles this time as a centre back, and the two fullbacks, Shea Brennan and Tony Dunn, they're quick, but their pace is not used as wingers. They don't plough forward. Their pace is used to cover. So it's an entirely different conception of the back four that United use, that Busby uses, from the one that Ramsey has been developing with England, which makes it fascinating from a tactical point of view because they got wingers, Benfica, and their idea is to either Eusebio picks up from deep and he'll just go and he'll play his little 1-2s and he'll go, or it's the wingers pumping the ball in for this giant Torres to knock down, and then the runner will come in, which is the way that Benfica managed to equalise. After, of course, Bobby Charlton has given United the lead with that.
It's Garza, isn't it? Isn't it Garza that equalised?
Graça. Yeah,
Graça.
Yeah, he levelled it. Yeah.
Yeah. So
it's a cross in, and Torres gets the knockdown, and then Graça arrives at the far post. There are 11 minutes to go. In those 11 minutes, it's almost all Benfica. They have 4 clear chances in, and one very, very clear one indeed. But they have 4 chances. That's how close United came to losing this game.
Oh, it was
if they'd lost it, it would have been a completely different drama scenario. But it feels to me that in that extra time, because things turn in 7 minutes of extra time, in that 7 minutes of the first half of extra time, in those 7 minutes, I think, going back to what we started this with, I think the thing that won the European Cup for Manchester United was the, emotion, the history, the determination, and it almost, if you know the history of 10 years before, you're almost in tears as the next few minutes, just play themselves out. I think Benfica are extremely tired. Maybe it's because of Adolfo. But Man United are pretty tired as well,
Charlton talks about what a humid night it was and how hard he was finding it.
Yeah, and particularly with the kind of war of attrition against Benfica. But in those 7 minutes, I think it's almost they had, God on their side, or they had, the spirits.
I think it was just a story, Dalton, that was just destined to have an ending. I don't think United was going to be allowed to lose that night. Because, like Tim was saying, on they had them last few chances, there was one where all through the game, Styles and Folkes, they'd watch Eusebio like a hawk. And like Styles he always used to drift off him, so we had a little bit of space on him. And then suddenly...
So he could build up momentum to kick him, almost certainly.
Absolutely, mate. He could kick him high up.
Leave him
and then
alone.
suddenly a ball went through. A ball went through. Eusebio was clear. We were stepping to beat. And it was like, it's all over. Anyway, he loved to score fantastic goals. He used to love to make the net balls, didn't he, Eusebio? He didn't like to score simple goals. And he went through and he smashed this one. And he just hit it straight at Stepney. And Stepney, and he missed it. And Stepney said for weeks he had the marks on his chest.
Wow. Because he doesn't only block it,
that close.
He catches it.
Him, yeah.
If he blocked it, Eusebio's there for the rebound, you know. So it's a
And
fabulous
then
piece
there's
of
the
goalkeeping.
sportsmanship, isn't there? When Eusebio,
Unbelievable.
and Stepney just going, just
Clear off. And Eusebio's trying to shake his hand, and say, well done.
Yeah.
Well done. I'll get you the next time.
That was the moment where Benfica come out and thought, oh, well, this is just not going to happen. And you know,
not a day. It's not.
Yeah, I know.
But it is amazing from Eusebio to see this, you know, in this feisty game. And it's purely the first instinct. Now he's blasted this shot. Stepney's made the save, and all Eusebio wants to do is congratulate him. I actually find it beautiful, you know, because this isn't. Oh yeah, this will look good. This will be good PR. You know, it's just purely. You know, it's unbelievable. It's lovely, a lovely moment.
He did the same.
Stepney doesn't want to know, does he? You know?
No. He just tells him where to go in a nice South London kind of way.
I think Stepney's looking at it. I think Stepney's looking at it as we would in this country as a bit of a wind up. You know, well, when you save a shot from a great footballer, the footballer, you know, comes up and shakes your hand and says, "Well done, mate. Let's see you try and save the next one," or whatever it is, and he's telling him to clear off, because he's never experienced it before, because that doesn't happen, you know, in the football that we're talking about in the late 60s. That kind of thing doesn't happen. It rarely happens now, of course. But those 7 minutes in extra time are the defining several minutes, and then what happens next? I mean, I defy anybody who knows the story of Manchester United's journey to winning the European Cup to watch what happens after full time without bursting into tears, because the players, they're in tears. First of all, they all rush to Matt Busby, and you can see what it means to them to have delivered for Matt Busby. They weren't playing for themselves, they were playing for the gaffer. He holds it down, but you can imagine what's going through his mind at the time. But each one of them, Bobby Charlton, obviously, was there in 58, and there is some special connection. In fact, he's perhaps on the surface the least emotional. I saw something, it's one of the papers, I think one of the Irish papers that covered this, and they were quoting Jack Charlton as saying that, his brother Bobby stopped smiling in 1958, in February 1958. And here he's not quite smiling. I think there's a look of relief.
I think that's the word, though. I think it was relief that it was just over. It just felt like the end of the rainbow, because you got to believe six years later, Man United got relegated. It was like,
I remember that time. As well.
And psychologically, they got nowhere to go now, have they? They climbed the mountain. There's only one way.
And at the end of the game, all the players were going to Busby and saying, "You go get the cup. You go and get the cup." But he insisted that Sir Bobby went and got it. But all the players, led by Paddy Crerand, they were saying, "Busby, yes, you have to go and get the cup." But no, he was adamant. He said no.
So Paddy Crerand was the captain.
No, Bobby Charlton.
No, Bobby was the captain, but Paddy was the one who was. I mean, he
was a leader, wasn't he? And a great player. There's one player I'd love to ask you about, because there's a player who fascinates me, because you watch this game and you think you're watching a young world-class talent emerge, and that's David Sadler, who
I knew you were going to pick him up. No, genuinely.
He played centre midfield in this game. He came to United as a centre forward and played centre midfield this game, and he has a number of chances to score because his timing of the run is beautiful. You know, there are a couple of times he gets behind the line, but he seems to have time on the ball. He's got 2 feet. Perhaps played some of his best football as a classy centre back. You know, you could play him alongside a kind of bruiser. What happened to him? Why didn't he go on and become truly great?
I think there was a lot of injuries involved with John Sadler. I was talking to my dad about him yesterday.
John Sadler or David Sadler?
David Sadler, sorry.
Right, okay, no problem.
And they were saying the best United team in that era was 2 years before. And Sadler was a major part of that team. And David Hurd as well, the centre forward from Arsenal. And he said that was a better United team than the one that actually won it, because the team that won it had kids and it had veterans. There was nothing really in between.
Right.
And that was kind of the problem going on. But with Saddle, I think it was just injuries, Tim, because they thought he was well liked. He was a brilliant footballer.
So that probably, because he's the one in the middle, isn't he? You got your kids, and you got your veterans.
Another one like Ashton, who probably played his best ever game that night.
Right.
You know, for United, it was just one of them occasions. You know, want to tell the grandkids, you can always put the DVD on.
Yeah, the celebrations went on and on. And
yeah.
in fact, they went on so long that the skies above Wembley darkened over the course of the celebrations. You know, the match was still in relative daylight, and then they were, the images I can see now just remind me of the emotion that not just Manchester United felt, but the whole country felt. Okay, this wasn't the first time that a British team had won the European Cup, because Celtic had won it the year before. It's the first time an English team had won the European Cup, but more importantly, I think at that time in 1968, the whole country knew the backstory of this. Yeah. What I remember very, very clearly the next day at school, people going to school, and this is in London, by the way, a long way away from Manchester, and they were chanting what apparently the Man United fans were chanting that day. Harold Wilson was the Prime Minister at the time, and they were chanting...
President.
No, they were chanting, Wilson out, Busby in, hallelujah, Wilson out, Busby.
There's a famous banner with Samat for Prime Minister.
I'm not surprised.
John, do you think that Munich is the start of, we might call it like the Cockney Red tradition, but do you think Munich is the start of United being a national club, not just with supporting Manchester?
I think it was
Salford.
After the crash, a lot of people because of the disaster. But at the time when the Busby Bays were going to play in London and they were going to play in the Midlands, and people were just absolutely blown away by him. Yeah. And it was the granddads who became fans, who probably passed it on to their sons, and it's gone over the years. And it's because they were just, it's the famous song, isn't it, when they're playing in your town. But apparently when the Babes turned up, it was like Hollywood movie stars, especially in London. They used to love playing in London because they loved the press and all this business and being the centre of attention. And the last game before Munich was the 5-4 game at Highbury, where they were fantastic. And I think you're dead right, Tim. I also think in the 70s as well, when the football violence kicked in a lot more, United tended to attract a lot of out of town, because basically we had more nutters than anybody else. I think we boiled down to. You was always going to get a rub with when United came to town. So I think there's a lot of support got attached to that. And then obviously later on when Sir Alex turned up, it was just another level of support, because kids wanted to be seen wearing the United top, didn't they? Because they were winning.
Were you ever tempted to trade the red as a kid when this game is happening? Were you ever tempted to trade the red of Charlton for the red of Man United?
Oh, I was born that year.
He's talking about me, but you go ahead.
Oh, sorry, mate.
No, you go ahead, Johnny. Were you ever tempted to trade the red and white?
Here I'm referring to struggling Charlton Athletic rather than the great Bobby Charlton.
Sir Bobby made his debut against Charlton Athletic at Old Trafford.
There you go. See, once upon a time, when we were giants, Tim, it wiped the smile off your face, that, didn't it? But when Tim said that the only way was down after reaching this pinnacle of winning the European Cup, I'm not sure that's the case. For the next few years, certainly for the next 3 or 4 years, Manchester United seemed to be the glamour club of
but it is on the way down. You look at the age of some of the folks goes now, isn't he?
I agree.
Crerand is beginning to reach it. Charlton's beginning to reach it. Law is out of this game through injury, and he's probably has played his best football.
And the kids that were coming through to him, they weren't
best
class. Best.
Well, the problem was Best, wasn't it? I thought in any case when you got relegated, because Best was being the fifth Beatle, wasn't he? And he was.
He does win this game though, doesn't he? Because the goal is the one that wins it is the second goal. Yeah. Straight after start of extra time.
I think whoever was going to score that second goal.
Punt forward from Stepney. Is there anyone else in that United team who could have scored that goal?
No.
It could have made it look as easy as
do you know, there's also an argument, like they always say about Gascoigne, don't they, that Italian 90 tour him. He was only a kid, was he 22? That was his epitaph. That was his moment. You could say the same for George. He was only 21. That was his greatest game.
With his socks rolled down around his ankles as well, just to show you he's a man.
Just the balance. You know, he can run at like 45
degrees. He made it look
degrees.
so easy, I think. And sometimes defenders think you're taking the piss when you sort of like stroll past them. So I can understand why they wanted to give him a kick to remind him that they were there. But when you got relegated in, was it 73?
74.
74. When you got relegated in 74, a far cry from winning the European Cup, 6 years earlier. How
amazing to think it's only 6 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
At the time when I was a kid, that seemed like an eternity. Now I realise that's just like a breath, isn't it? You know, 6 years.
Of course, but you still had a lot. You still had Bobby Charlton playing. For
he left at 72.
Yeah, Bobby got. So what had happened? Dotun, Tommy Dock had come in under the. They'd gone through. They had Franco Farrell, never worked. Wolf McGuinness never had a chance. Never
had a chance. Yeah, and he went bald as a result. Yeah. He lost all his hair as a result of the pressure of stepping into the Matt Busby role.
United can get you like that, Tim, after the last few years.
You still got all your hair, mate. You still got all your hair.
Okay. Well, old Farrell turned up. United were doing all right for a bit with him, but then he had Best playing, but then Best just fell off a cliff. United fell off a cliff. So Busby, he got Tommy Dock in, and Tommy Dock's orders was get rid of Charlton, get rid of Best, get the young players in, and let's start again, even if we have to go down. Anyway, Tommy Dock took us down. They didn't, but then he brought all these exciting young footballers like Stevie Coppell. I think it was the last person Jimmy Murphy bought, or said you've got to get him. Gordon Hill, Stuart Pearson, Lou Macari.
They were a glamour side as
they played beautiful football. Do
you think that Best was savable? And what do you make of the relationship between Best and Charlton? I mean, there's one moment in this game where you see Best at his most infuriating, because there's a lovely dribble. Paddy Crerand has made the run. You play in Paddy Crerand and he's one-on-one on the goalkeeper, and Best doesn't do it. You know, he hangs on too long and he gets tackled. And so I imagine that he was frustrating to play with.
But I think I reckon he drove Charlton mad. You know, when he used to go off on these dribbles and they're screaming for him in the box, and he'd just going here and there. There's a great story where Charlton's screaming at him to pass his unmarked in the box, and Best beats one man, beats two. He said, George, pass me what a goal. So when you've got, I suppose, and people forget, for 2 or 3 years, George was winning match bonuses, was winning win ball. You know, after 68, he was United's top scorer for 2 years. And they reckon because United never rebuilt proper and he wasn't going anywhere, that's half the reason that he went off the rails, because he couldn't. He was like, say, he's winning match bonuses, but he must have been looking around thinking, what am I doing?
Do you think that, or do you think that there might be something here of, because he had a problem. It's a medical problem. Do you think, we've probably all had friends who've been involved in some kind, and so often you see them looking for any excuse.
Yeah, that's a point.
Do you think that justification of Best, that they didn't rebuild properly around him, is the explanation for him going off the rails, or he would have gone off the rails anyway because that's what he was?
It was a great excuse for him. It was a great excuse because like say the 2 years after we won the European Cup, he was our top scorer, but from 70 to 74, it was just a nightmare. He was just, but even Busby wanted him out of the club at the end, because football wasn't on his agenda. He kept retiring. How many times can you retire? And then coming back. And because he was so attached to United, and remember, lads, he was only 24, 25. If he could have gone to another, Brian Clough would have got hold of him.
Doesn't it really seem that when we're talking about Bobby Charlton and George Best, we're not only talking about different personalities, but it's almost like we're talking about different generations. I know the age gap between them is not that big. You know, it's a few years, but it's not that big. But, you know, George Best, no one was ever going to say that Bobby Charlton was the fifth Beatle. You would never say that, would you? You know,
not just because of the lack of hair.
No, but just
I think you've got.
He belongs to a different age, doesn't he?
I think you've got a really important point. There is a cut-off point, isn't there,
Yeah.
where a person either belongs to the Victorian age or doesn't belong to the Victorian age, and that cut-off point is a matter of weeks sometimes or months. You know, the difference between it.
And do you know what, Dotun? Like, Best was a child of the 60s. When after the Benfica game, he put the big sombrero on, and he was a symbol of the 60s. Whereas Sir Bobby, like last time we spoke about the 50s, they were the last, or they were the start of the new teenage generation, weren't they? And Sir Bobby was part of that. At the 50s, the 60s, I mean, you have to remember, he'd already been through Munich, lost all his mates. So that must have aged him 10 years mentally. And then George comes on the scene, who's just like, was the fifth Beatle. So Bobby, when he's seen what had gone before, it must have been a shock to his system.
Well, and I think that's why, sorry, I cut you off. You finish your point, John.
No, you're right, mate. I was just saying, and then he saw what Best got away with. He must have thought, back in the 50s, none of our lot.
I think it's more straightforward than that. I think the key is in the way that you described that reaction to, you know, pass me the, what a great goal.
What a great goal, yeah.
Because that reminded me of when Cristiano Ronaldo joined Man United and Ruud van Nistelrooy. You know, you could see him thinking, okay, you know, yeah, he's doing the step overs, a little bit too much step overs. Football's more direct than that. And an earlier generation would have seen it as being a much simpler game than doing all the tricks and stuff. And that also defines the generation gap. Like, as you say,
right.
Yeah, as you say, George Best was a child of the 60s. We expect him to be like the 60s, you know, long-haired, loudmouth, going out to clubs every flipping night and enjoying himself. Whereas Bobby Charlton's much more stoic about his approach to life and football, you know.
Bobby Charlton's almost like Second World War generation, isn't he?
Yeah.
He is. Well, he was born, what, in 1940, wasn't he? Or,
a bit earlier.
Well, he was 1958, so 39. 1939, is it?
38,
right?
Something like that.
Yeah. But you know, you could see the difference that makes. And even if you were born during the war as well, it defines you. I'm sorry, even if you were a baby, it defines you, because the next few years after the war, you're still, you know, living the consequences of the war, whether it's through rationing and everything else, you know. And
he did national service as well. Didn't he?
There you go. And I can't imagine George Best doing national service. I just can't imagine it.
Get your bloody haircut.
That's it. That's me done then. I can't do the Irish accent, but
sorry, my dad said something yesterday what stuck in my mind as well. He said, Best is the most talented Manchester United player he's ever seen, but Sir Bobby was the greatest. And I was thinking about that last night, and I kind of know what he means, you know, because over decades. Whereas Best was like a shooting star. He was just amazing player.
How jealous? I mean, you've seen some of the great United sides of the Ferguson era. How jealous are you of your dad having the Charlton Law Best era?
Oh, very. I mean, they're all absolute hailed as gods at United. The three of them, Best, Law, and Charlton. We've got the statues outside, and I would have loved to have seen George, because everyone you speak to, they just say they can't describe. Every time, the only person I think got close to describing George when he was playing was McIlvanney. You know, McIlvanney with his pieces. I think it's sad when you watch him. He goes one way, then he goes another, and then he can dip his shoulder. He can go across. The famous goal against Sheffield United, where he just keeps going and going and going across the park, and then bang, it's in the bottom left-hand corner. You know, these goals, the chip against Tottenham, Pat Jenny.
Yeah, I'm sure that one should have been ruled out.
Yeah, I forgot him.
Sure, there was some reason to rule that one out.
Do you know what I think George Best's greatest legacy is? It's not to Manchester United. It's to a generation of young school kids, boys, but I think a lot of the girls fancied him and all, but a generation of young school kids who all thought we could do a George Best. We all wanted to be wingers. We all wanted to wear the number 7 shirt or the number 11 shirt. We all wanted to dribble. We all believed that we could dribble. And he made it glorious for us. You know, Bobby Charlton.
Again, there's that generational difference.
Exactly.
Because
exactly.
The teacher in Kes, he wanted to be Bobby Charlton.
Of course.
Yeah.
But his kids wanted to be George Best.
Yeah. That's a very clever novel, Kes, Kestrel for a Knave. And in the film, of course, it's Brian Glover, isn't it? Who plays the teacher there. And you can see already he belongs to another generation who will never understand the kids. And it's very clever novel. But I remember so distinctly. It's a shame that they didn't have, you know, patented football shirts at that point, because the only one that would have sold is George Best. I can assure you of that, you know. Right. But I think Bobby Charlton's legacy is more about Manchester United. You know, you can't see him going anywhere. Even when George Best went to New York Cosmos, and before that he went to Fulham for a while and all that sort of stuff. It's kind of like, well, yeah, you can get that. I couldn't see.
Well, Real Madrid went for him.
He never played for them, though, did he?
No, they tried to get him, but he just wasn't. It was after the crash.
He wasn't having it.
Yeah.
Bobby Charlton you're talking about. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, Bobby Charlton. They met him. He met the Real Madrid guy called supporter. He was like the guy, Romando supporter. He'd go out and get all the players. They could sign anybody. The only player they never really got who they wanted was Bobby Charlton and Pele, which they couldn't get Pele out of the country.
Do you know who else came in for Bobby Charlton? Boca Juniors. It's unbelievable, this story. 62, and he's in the World Cup in Chile, and he gets an approach from Boca Juniors, because at that point in Argentina they're paying big salaries, and they sat down with him and they said, I think his wife might have been pregnant at the time, and they said, we can arrange for your wife to give birth in the British Embassy, so your kid will be qualified to play for England if you want, you know. And he would have earned much more money doing that than he did staying at.
They reckon he never really earned that much, you know.
No, of course he did.
I don't think he did. I don't think he did. Yeah. That's why they had to give him the role as a honorary director or whatever. Ambassador is the better word. Ambassador. Embassy, you know, it all ties up in the end of the day. But did you know, and we always look at the soundtrack to all these great matches on the Brazilian Shirt Name podcast, did you realize that the soundtrack to this amazing match on the 29th of May 1968, the soundtrack was so brilliant? I can't believe it. Johnny, just recently we were talking about a match, and we talked about the worst ever pop chart soundtrack to the match in question. Here, I believe this is the best ever soundtrack. Yeah, I do. Best ever chart. There isn't a single track in the top 10 that I could say anything against. In the top 20, there's a couple of duds, but you know, I'll pass over on those. But otherwise, you know, in the top 50, you're talking about a cracking pop chart here. What did you make of it?
Well, I thought it was sensational. I mean, What a Wonderful World was the song that was in the charts. That's the song that Sir Matt sang at the aftermatch gala in London. Now, it was kind because they said he was crying when he was singing it, but it's the kind of song that you can look at both ways. You can look at an irony song or just an absolutely joyful song. But apparently he was in tears at the end when he finished. And I'd seen this done before with this song in Good Morning Vietnam with Robin Williams.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful song. The words are absolutely.
And it's a double A side with Cabaret from the musical on the other side, and that's when you get to hear Louis Armstrong at his best. You know, the sound of his trumpet, just the tenor.
I don't think we realise just how important Louis Armstrong was.
Yeah.
I reckon we do. I reckon I do.
Because he became associated with trad, didn't he? When he had a real beef with bebop.
Yeah.
And that's his Bobby Charlton, George Best moment. You know, when Charlie Parker and Dizzy are doing bebop,
right.
he doesn't get it and he can't understand it, and he's seen as an old crusty. But what he's done, he's reinvented rhythm in not only playing his instrument but also singing. No one had sung the way that Louis Armstrong sung before Louis Armstrong sung.
So distinctive, isn't it?
And I'm not talking about the tone of the voice. I'm talking about the rhythm, the way that he would come off the beat, behind the beat. You know, people used to sing things straight, and then Louis is using all of this syncopation as an instrumentalist and as a vocalist. I think it's almost like the birth of the 20th century. You know, after the First World War, you're looking for something new, and you're industrializing. And the way that he uses his voice, I think, is just so much. Everything that happens everyone you're singing to these days, there's something of Louis in them.
That's big. That's a big statement. Do you agree, Johnny?
I think he's definitely he was a one-off at the time, and you listen to all these top stars now in the last 20 years, they all mention him. I'll say, you know, going back in time, he's one of my idols, because there's never been nothing like him before.
Well, he
was a one-off. There was nothing, you know.
He virtually invented jazz, literally from the equivalents of the House of the Rising Sun in New Orleans, because that's where he played. He played in brothels. That's where jazz was played when he was Louis Armstrong and the Timpani Five. And in those days, he wasn't singing, you know. He started singing because, you know,
by chance, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think vocalists let him down, or he just thought, I can do better than that. And initially, his gravel voice didn't lend itself. So he's had to do a lot of work to make it work, as it were.
Well, the microphone.
Well, yes. Although the microphone
that changes singing, doesn't it?
Yeah,
the microphone.
But it did primarily for the blues artists. Big Joe Turner, for example, went from being a blues shouter to being a blues singer because of the microphone. In the old days, they literally would shout to the end of the bar room, and that's how they sang. So you hear those early...
You got to hit the back of the stalls, you know, and then the microphone will do it all for you.
But
Isn't it amazing
I don't think Louis Armstrong was ever a shouter, though.
No. Well, I don't think his voice would project that far. I don't think he could do it, you know, so he needs the microphone to help him.
My dad told me a story about when he first started going out with my mum, and my mum loved Louis Armstrong. So we paid a fortune for these tickets to go and see him in Manchester.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, they went, and it was a fantastic. And then they went to this.
Can we all have your dad's life, please?
Then they went to this little club afterwards, and he was sat there, he was having a drink. Now, I can't remember the name of the club, but it was run by a well-known Manchester gangster at the time, and all the superstars never always used to head there to this club. And who comes on stage at the end of the night? It's on Louis Armstrong. And you think my dad would be dead chuffed. He was so annoyed because he paid all the money for them tickets. He could have just gone to the club.
No, your old man's not a cheapskate.
I think watching Armstrong in a smaller...
Much better.
That's what it's all about.
That's the way he would have loved it, although he could do both. And the great thing about Louis Armstrong, you see him, he can do it. He can duet with Ella Fitzgerald. In my view, the best version of Summertime, that classic tune, is with Ella Fitzgerald and Louis Armstrong. Everybody else has to just let that one go, because that's going to be the classic forever and ever and ever. But he also brought fun into music. You know, you can almost hear the smile on his face as he's singing. There's no... What a Wonderful World is a perfect song for him, because it's got a positive message, and that's what his voice... And he went out to make sure that people had a great time. Anyway, he's number 4 in the charts. Number 1 is Young Girl, Union Gap.
It's a great song, although lyrically it's becomes harder to justify with time, perhaps.
I understand that.
But it's a great song.
Yeah. And number 2, Honey, Bobby Goldsboro.
Well, you're just beginning to see these
these
singer-songwriters,
with the guitars.
Don, whatever his name is, with American Pie, you know, and
Don McLean,
and Tim Harding, You know, there's a generation of singer-songwriter. I think he's a great songwriter, a great storyteller, Bobby Goldsborough.
But then you've still got the old crooners like Engelbert Humperdinck. This is after Engelbert Humperdinck's, famous song, Please Release Me, Let Me Go. He's at number 3 with A Man Without Love.
I reckon Bobby Charlton would have liked this. And Bobby Moore loved Engelbert Humperdinck, drove them all mad with his, he drove the younger members of the England squad mad with his Engelbert Humperdinck records. But he's fascinating, Engelbert. You know where he was born?
Leicester.
Madras.
Oh, yes, of course. You're right, actually. Yeah.
And if you look at him, I can't believe that there is no Indian. The official story is that his dad was an English serviceman and his wife was German, but he looks so Indian to me.
Yeah,
mate. If you scratch on the surface of all of our roots, we're probably all Indian somewhere in the past.
We're all African. If you trace us all back, we're all African.
Exactly.
But for that kind of singing, Engelbert did it very well, didn't he?
So you say that Bobby Charlton would have loved Louis Armstrong's What Wonderful, would have loved A Man Without Love by Engelbert Humperdinck at number 3. I can tell you that, you can confirm this, Johnny. Lazy Sunday by the Small Faces. I imagine George Best, the younger generation, would have danced away to that one, particularly with a sombrero hat on.
Oh, yeah. They had the club, the Twisted Wheel in Manchester. I mean, George's was all over the place, apparently. But I don't know.
When Top of the Pops started off being filmed in Manchester before it come down to London, and he's there all the time, and he just looks brilliant, George Best. It's a big song. This
around him, aren't they? They're all dancing around him.
It's a big song, this one, Lazy Sunday. I think because what we're seeing here is a change. Things are just about to change.
Yeah.
Because this is the song that ends the Small Faces.
Sadly.
Because it's a big hit. And, there's a little bit of novelty in it. They've Steve Marriott has East ended it up, hasn't he? Rinky dinky doo, a riddly diddly die.
It doesn't sound like it's a parody. It sounds kind of like.
Well, it's natural.
Genuine.
It's what they were.
Yeah.
It's a song of it. It's a song of its time, isn't it?
It's a great. I think it's a great companion to She's Leaving Home by the Beatles, to talk about generation gap, but in a totally different way. The Beatles do it with a kind of air of melancholy. She's leaving home after living alone for so many years. The Small Faces, it's happy. There's that thing. Here we all are sitting on a rainbow. Yeah. Hello, Mrs. Jones. How's your birds?
Lumbago.
Mustn't grumble. And you see the generation gap there.
I wrote quite a lot about the 60s. With different books, and there's nothing better than putting soundtracks together. The years, and you're just amazed by how many great songs there was.
But there's still this is the end of an era, because as a result of it being a hit and having this novelty element, Marriott at the Small Faces becomes deeply, deeply ashamed of it, really ashamed of it. And it's at the time when, right at this point, the so-called serious bands are going to stop releasing singles because they don't want to attract that kind of following. So if you look at the singles chart a year further, 2 years further, the heavyweights are not even in it. The new heavyweights, your Led Zeppelins, they won't even bother releasing singles because they don't want to be a singles band. And so it's like the bird. And Marriott himself, he walks out and he forms Humble Pie. And there's there's none of the East End jollity. It's all like American stadium rock. He's after a kind of blues authenticity thing. It's the singles chart really suffers as a result. It stops being the place of the main event for the new generation that are coming up, that want to communicate with older fans through the medium of the album rather than the medium of the single. It's a massive change, even though the Rolling Stones are just about to go into absolute fucking overdrive and coming into the charts now, because they're still doing singles because they're from that culture of your single every 3 months. And Jumping Jack Flash just comes into the charts this week, and over the next year or so, they got Street Fighting Man. That they've just found, because the Stones have just come out of trying to imitate psychedelia, and that didn't work. You know, the We Love You stuff, that didn't work. They've really found themselves as an R&B band. And
again,
because
remember that's where they started from. Yeah.
And so they're going into an absolute, and Gimme Shelter, for fuck's sake, you're talking about some of the absolute peaks of our culture. But the new ones that are coming along, they don't want to do the singles no more. And part of that is as a result of the success of Lazy Sunday.
The opening scene of The Departed, when they've got Gimme Shelter, have you seen the film The Departed?
No.
I've seen it,
yeah. When they got Gimme Shelter at the beginning, and it just sets it up. Well, I think the great thing about that period as well, you have music coming at you from everywhere, didn't you?
Exactly.
All different genres.
Sinatra, Elvis was making his...
Well, we'll come on to that in a moment. You've got a Teddy boy here, so what do you expect?
Right.
No, but it's interesting. I think you're right to define these charts as being just like the Manchester United team that were playing against Benfica, to be a dichotomy of older and younger generation. It's clear in this charts, but there's one other thing that's going through. You have got the younger generation being represented not just by the Rolling Stones, arguably by the likes of Scott Walker, who was kind of balancing two acts.
He's walking a tightrope.
Exactly. I'm coming on to that in just a second, but you see a lot of other, Baby Come Back by the Equals, which is an amazing track. Eventually gets to number one. And that represents a younger generation that's coming up, and the multicultural younger generation, may I say that as well. And then you've got the likes of the Hollies. I'm not sure about, by the way, Baby Come Back's at number 20.
I think Graham Nash has left them, so they're not quite, or he's just about to leave, maybe.
Yeah, he's not quite on it. But Gene Pitney, Somewhere in the Country, arguably as well. Donovan, hurdy-gurdy man.
Not for me.
Over that? Yeah, not
just let that one go away.
Yeah, let's just pass on that one. But you've got Tyrannosaurus Rex, as they are. this is a younger generation we're talking about before they become T-Rex.
It's their most T-Rex song, isn't it? Deborah.
Because
it's quite upbeat. Because a lot of his stuff at this time is all hippie meditation. And when T-Rex made it big, this was the one that got re-released, because this was
Do you think, lads, just a quick one, do you think this was the next 2-3 years was the best period in the history of pop rock music?
For me, it's the previous 2 years.
Right.
For me, this ain't a bad time, because I think this is a transition period. You've got some of the old re-releases coming through, the rock and roll re-releases.
Yeah, there's a lot of rock and roll re-releases, isn't there?
Yeah, a lot of that. And then
they just won't let it die. There's so much contemporary stuff. Why won't you let it rest?
Go on, do the proper lyric to that. They say it's never going to die. Anyway,
just don't know what's going to replace
it. Brothers in there in the charts, and you mentioned Elvis. Interesting thing about Elvis here is that Elvis is representing the old school, and he has become very old school since.
Has he done his 68 special yet, or is that later in the year?
I think it's about this time. I'm not sure, actually. It's a good question. And he's definitely he's back again at this point. He comes out with this tune, which is a twee little tune about the US mail. Like a lot of Elvis songs, they become sort of self-deprecating, slight sort of, biographies of his life. So he is the US mail, M-A-L-E, rather than the US mail, M-A-I-L. But at the same time, you've got Aretha Franklin in there with Think. Can you imagine that? Imagine that you're in a chart alongside the likes of Aretha Franklin. Solomon King, When We Were Young, amazing track for me.
Otis Redding has died.
Yes.
So they're trying to make money off him.
But the Happy Song ain't a bad track.
No, it's all right, but it's not up to it, and it's what he was moving away from as well. With Dock at the Bay, which is always the fascinating thing about Otis. Where would he have gone? William Bell, Tribute to a King, is all about Otis.
Yeah, brilliant. Dinah Ross and the Supremes, Forever Came Today. It's not their best, but nevertheless, this is what you're talking about in this chart. I think the chart is a real transition period. There's
something that surely reminds us all of our childhoods. Jackie, White Horses.
Well, I'm not sure.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Oh, you're probably too old for it.
Yeah, no, it's not that I'm too old for it.
It was one of those bizarre, like Eastern European TV series that, was on. I never remember anything about it, but I just remember the theme tune, which was White Horses by Jackie, which it just carries you. It floats. It's beautiful.
And the old school still trying to maintain a presence with at number 13, Andy Williams, Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
Great song.
Well,
Great song.
exactly.
Yeah,
And that's the
classic.
classic. That's
Yeah.
still there.
Yeah.
Whereas Jackie, White Horses, I mean, come on now, Tim.
What, you prefer Rupert the Bear?
Yes, something like that. Talking of which, there is a kind of a Rupert the Bear tune there. Simon Says by the 1910 Fruit Gum Company. I remember that because as an 8-year-old, this is what you're singing. Simple Simon Says, put your hands in the air. That was such an easy one to get into the
You've grown up. Go on.
I was just going to say, I think Rupert the Bear's had his head put out the last couple of weeks, hasn't he, with the other fella?
Very good point. I think on that note, let's wrap up this edition of the Brazilian podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure, John, to have
I've
you
enjoyed
with
it,
us.
mate. Thank you.
Guide us through. I can't believe it's taken us so long to cover this amazing match, which brings back so many memories for me, but for a lot of other people as well. And even if you weren't there at the time, the resonance continues till today. And I think it will forever in football. 10 years.
And they didn't win it again, Tim, till 1999. So it shows you how hard it is to win.
Yeah. But this is the sweetest one, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
Not just because it was the first time and the history that was being made, but just because of the drama that we've been talking about as well.
It's just the end of the rainbow, wasn't it? It was the ending, journey's end.
And as George Best put that clinching second goal into the back of the net, the Benfica defenders are looking at each other and they're saying, why, Delilah?
Oh.
Very well done. And that's in the charts and all.